My name is Sophia Carter, and at 28, I never thought I'd be fighting my own parents. Over money that wasn't even mine, that stormy night in Boston changed everything. As I raced to Massachusetts General Hospital, my heart pounded with fear about Grandpa Harold in the ICU. When I arrived, I felt momentary relief seeing my family gathered until I noticed my parents huddled in the corner, frantically checking accounts on their phones, whispering urgently. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. Before I continue with my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, subscribe to hear more family betrayal stories that might just save you from the same fate. Grandpa Harold Mitchell wasn't just my grandfather. He was my rock, my mentor, and often my savior. At 85, he still maintained a sharp mind and a sharper wit, despite his body beginning to betray him in small ways. Every Sunday, for as long as I could remember, I'd drive to his beautiful colonial mansion in Cambridge for dinner, sometimes bringing dessert, but always bringing stories from my week that he'd listen to with genuine interest. Amber, my girl, he'd often say, his blue eyes twinkling beneath bushy white eyebrows, "You're the only one in this family who inherited my business sense." He'd wink, knowing full well how much that compliment meant to me, especially since my parents had always pushed me towards safer, more traditional career paths. When I decided to major in marketing instead of accounting like my father wanted, it was Grandpa Harold who stood up for me at that tense family dinner. Let the girl follow her passion, he'd insisted, silencing my father with just a look. Later, he secretly funded my education when my parents refused, telling me, investments in bright minds always pay the highest dividends. That was Grandpa Harold, generous to a fault and fiercely supportive of those he loved. My parents, Stephanie and Warren Mitchell, were a different story altogether. They lived in a constant state of financial anxiety, despite their upper middle class lifestyle. Dad worked as a financial advisor, ironically enough, while Mum ran a boutique that barely broke even. They maintained appearances with a desperation that confused me as a child, but made perfect sense as I grew older and recognized their deep-seated resentment toward Grandpa Harold's success. The tension between them had always simmered beneath polite Sunday dinners. My father, Harold's only son, believed he deserved a larger portion of the family wealth simply by virtue of being born. "Your grandfather doesn't understand the modern economy," he'd complain after we'd leave. "Those dinners. He thinks everyone can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps like he did." Times are different now. What my father never acknowledged was that Grandpa Harold had built his fortune from nothing. After returning from military service, he'd worked his way through engineering school and eventually developed several technological innovations that revolutionized satellite communications. His patents had made him a millionaire many times over by the time I was born. The mansion he lived in wasn't just a home. It was a museum of his life's work and passions. Antique mechanical clocks lined the hallway, their gentle ticking creating a soothing rhythm throughout the house. Valuable art adorned the walls, not chosen for investment purposes, but because each piece spoke to him personally. A first edition book collection filled the library alongside engineering journals, containing his published articles. Everything in that house told the story of a life fully lived. My parents visited Grandpa Harold just enough to maintain appearances, and what they hoped would be their place in his will. Every visit seemed to involve a subtle inventory of his possessions, with Mom's eyes lingering too long on artwork, or Dad asking pointed questions about the value of certain collections. "He doesn't even appreciate these pieces properly," my mother would mutter on the drive home. They're wasted on him. I noticed a shift in their behavior about 6 months before the stroke. Suddenly, they were visiting Grandpa Harold weekly, bringing him groceries he didn't need, and offering to help with house maintenance he already had staff to handle. I found it suspicious, but Grandpa seemed pleased by the attention, if a bit puzzled by it. "Your parents have finally decided I'm worth knowing in my old age," he joked during one of our private Sunday dinners. "Wonder what brought that on?" I laughed it off then, but the unease lingered, especially when I began noticing small changes in his home. A silver pocket watch that usually sat on the mantel disappeared. A small painting from the upstairs hallway vanished, replaced with a similar but cheaper print. When I mentioned these observations to Grandpa, he brushed them off as him simply rearranging things or having items cleaned. The final red flag came 3 weeks before his stroke. My parents, who had been complaining about tight finances for months, suddenly drove up in a brand new Lexus. When I asked how they could afford it, Mom vaguely mentioned an investment finally paying off. Dad changed the subject immediately, asking if I'd visited Grandpa Harold lately, and whether he'd been making any changes to his affairs. Their interest in his legal and financial matters had grown increasingly transparent, but I never imagined how far they would go until that night in the ICU, when everything I thought I knew about my family was turned upside down. The call came at 11:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember checking the time because late-night calls always trigger that immediate rush of dread. The hospital number flashing on my screen only confirmed my worst fears. "Miss Mitchell, this is Nurse Jasmine from Massachusetts General Hospital. Your grandfather, Harold Mitchell, has been admitted after suffering what appears to be a severe stroke. He's currently being stabilized in the ICU." The world tilted sideways as I grabbed my keys, still wearing the yoga pants and MIT sweatshirt I'd thrown on after work. The 20-minute drive to the hospital became a blur of streetlights and windshield wipers, battling the beginning of what would become a historic northeastern storm. Massachusetts General's emergency entrance was blindingly bright after the dark drive. I identified myself at the reception desk, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Family of Harold Mitchell." A tired-looking nurse with kind eyes led me through the labyrinthine corridors. "The doctors have managed to stabilize him, but he's unconscious," she explained gently. "We've run initial tests, but the neurologist will have more information in the morning. Nothing prepares you for seeing someone you love rendered unrecognizable by illness." Grandpa Harold, always larger than life, with his booming voice and commanding presence, looked shrunken beneath the hospital sheets. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hummed, monitoring every essential function his body now struggled to perform independently. I approached his bed slowly, taking his hand, still warm, thank God, between mine. His skin felt paper thin, blue veins visible beneath the surface. A ventilator masked half his face, breathing for him with mechanical precision. "Can he hear me?" I asked the nurse. "We believe hearing is often the last sense to go, so it's always good to talk to him," she replied. "I'll give you some privacy." I sat beside him, talking softly about nothing and everything, promising him I'd be there when he woke up, trying to ignore the voice in my head, questioning if he would wake up at all. Dr. Lewis, the attending physician, came by shortly after with a carefully measured blend of honesty and hope. "Your grandfather has suffered a significant cerebral event," he explained, using a tablet to show me brain scan images I couldn't begin to interpret. "However, he's stable, which is our first concern. The next 24 to 48 hours will tell us more about potential recovery." I was still processing this information when my parents burst into the room. looking oddly frantic rather than grief-stricken. Mom immediately began questioning the doctor about prognosis and timeline, while Dad stood at the foot of the bed, eyes darting between Grandpa Harold and the monitors, as if calculating something. Has he regained consciousness at all? Dad asked, his voice carrying an urgency that struck me as inappropriate. Not yet, Dr. Lewis replied. As I was explaining to Amber, we'll know more in the coming days. And his cognitive function, when he wakes up, will he be himself? My mother's question came with a strange emphasis that made me look at her sharply. Dr. Lewis maintained his professional demeanor. Brain injuries are complex. Some patients recover fully. Others experience varying degrees of impairment. It's simply too early to make predictions. Shortly after the doctor left, my Aunt Kimberly arrived. Having caught the first flight from Chicago, Dad's younger sister had always been closer to Grandpa Harold, sharing his intellectual curiosity and ethical backbone. The tension between her and my parents was immediately palpable. I came as soon as I heard, she said, embracing me before approaching Grandpa's bedside. Her eyes welled with tears as she took in his condition. Oh, Dad, while Aunt Kim spoke softly to Grandpa. My parents retreated to the corner of the room, whispering urgently. I caught fragments. While we have the chance, and before she realizes. My father stepped out to get coffee twice within an hour, returning, without any beverages, but looking increasingly agitated. During his second absence, my mother asked me questions that, in retrospect, should have immediately set off alarms. Did your grandfather ever mention giving you access to his accounts? She asked, trying to sound casual. No, why would he? I replied, confused by the question. Just thinking practically. Bills will need to be paid, his house managed. Someone needs to have access. She paused, then added with forced nonchalance. Your father and I are thinking we should check on his house tomorrow. Make sure everything's secure. When Dad returned, their strange behavior continued. He asked if I knew the code to Grandpa's home security system, claiming concern about potential break-ins during the developing storm. Later, I overheard him asking Aunt Kimberly if Grandpa had updated his will recently, a question that earned him a cold stare. Why don't you focus on his recovery instead, Kurt? As evening stretched into night, the hospital staff suggested we take turns staying with Grandpa. My parents immediately volunteered me for the first shift, claiming they needed to rest and prepare for the days ahead. The eagerness with which they left bothered me, but exhaustion was taking its toll on my ability to process their behavior. Critically, Aunt Kimberly squeezed my shoulder before leaving. Call me immediately if anything changes, she said, then lowered her voice. And Amber, don't let your parents make any decisions about Dad's care or his affairs without consulting me first. Her warning lingered in the quiet ICU room as I settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair for the night. The steady beeping of monitors and the growing howl of wind outside the only sounds accompanying my troubled thoughts. The next 3 days fell into a numbing routine. Grandpa Harold remained stable but unconscious. The neurologist, Dr. Patel, explained that while the initial brain swelling was subsiding, they were keeping him in a medically induced coma to promote healing. I took emergency leave from work, camping out in the ICU waiting room when not allowed at his bedside. My parents established their own peculiar routine, arriving mid-morning, leaving for extended lunch breaks, returning briefly in the afternoon, then departing early evening for dinner and rest. During their absences, the nursing staff inadvertently revealed a pattern. Your parents were asking about your grandfather's personal effects, Nurse Jasmine mentioned while checking vitals. They wanted his wallet and phone. I explained we're keeping all valuables in the hospital safe until Mr. Mitchell can claim them himself. Another nurse, Marcus, casually noted, "Your folks were here until quite late last night after you left to shower and change. Your dad was very interested in whether your grandfather had regained consciousness, even briefly. These comments might have remained merely curious observations. If not for what happened on the fourth day, I had stepped out to the cafeteria for a desperately needed coffee when I returned to find my father's iPad sitting on the chair beside Grandpa's bed. My parents had left about 20 minutes earlier, claiming they needed to meet with their financial advisor. As I picked up the device to put it aside, a notification lit up the screen. The iPad wasn't locked, an oversight that would prove their undoing. The notification previewed an email with the subject line, "Confirmation of transfer, $250,000. I shouldn't have looked. Under normal circumstances, I would have respected their privacy, but the amount, combined with their recent suspicious behavior, triggered an instinct I couldn't ignore. The email confirmed a transfer from an account I didn't recognize to my father's personal offshore account, established just 2 weeks earlier. With trembling fingers, I opened their email client fully, finding dozens of similar confirmations. The total neared $990,000, all transferred within the past 3 days. My blood ran cold when I noticed the sending account name, H. Mitchell, Living Trust. Further investigation revealed email exchanges between my parents that erased any possibility of an innocent explanation. Transfer the remaining funds today. K is getting suspicious. What about A? She's always at the hospital. She has no idea. By the time the old man wakes up, if he wakes up, it will be too late. Remember to delete these messages." Thankfully, my father had forgotten that basic instruction. I was still processing this discovery, feeling physically ill, when my parents returned. I'd placed the iPad exactly where I'd found it, but something in my expression must have betrayed me. "Everything okay with Dad?" my mother asked, studying my face. "No change," I replied, struggling to maintain composure. "I'm going to grab lunch in the cafeteria. Would you like anything?" They declined, and I walked stiffly from the room, waiting until I was in the elevator to let out the breath I'd been holding. Instead of going to the cafeteria, I found an empty waiting room, pulled out my phone, and took screenshots of everything I'd seen on the iPad, emailing them to myself as evidence. I needed time to think, to plan my approach. Simply accusing them would likely result in denials and potentially give them time to cover their tracks further. But confrontation was inevitable. I found them in the cafeteria an hour later, huddled together over coffee, my father's iPad now conspicuously absent. "We need to talk," I said, sliding into the seat across from them, "about Grandpa's accounts." The color drained from my mother's face, while my father's features hardened into defensive anger. "What about them?" he asked, his tone falsely casual. "About the $990,000 you've transferred out of them since he's been unconscious." I kept my voice low but firm, maintaining eye contact with each of them in turn. "That's ridiculous," Mom hissed, looking around to ensure no one could overhear. "We're helping manage his affairs while he's ill. He would want us to," Dad added, "by creating offshore accounts, by emptying his living trust. That's not management, that's theft." My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Your grandfather was going to leave it to us anyway. We're just accelerating the process." "You mean you're stealing from a man who might still recover, who trusted you to respect his wishes?" "We deserve this money after everything," my mother interjected, abandoning pretense. Do you know what it's been like living in his shadow? Having him dangle financial security in front of us while judging every decision we've made. So this is revenge? Taking advantage of his stroke to rob him blind. It's compensation, Dad countered. And legally, we have every right. We have power of attorney. That stopped me cold. Since when? He signed the papers last month, Mom said, a smug smile forming. We have complete control over his finances, while he's incapacitated. Something in their confidence didn't ring true. Grandpa Harold was meticulous about his legal affairs and had never mentioned granting them such authority. In fact, he'd expressed concerns about my father's financial judgment on several occasions. I'm giving you one chance, I said, standing up. Return every penny by tomorrow, or I'm going to the authorities. Power of attorney doesn't give you the right to drain his accounts for personal use. My father stood as well, towering over me. You're making a mistake, Amber. Think very carefully about what you're doing. If you pursue this, you'll regret it. The threat hung in the air between us as I walked away, my heart pounding, but resolve strengthening with each step. I needed to see those power of attorney documents for myself, and there was only one place they would be, Grandpa Harold's home. The drive to Cambridge was harrowing. The storm that had been threatening for days had finally arrived in full force, with sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere feet and wind gusts strong enough to push against my small sedan. Traffic crawled along Memorial Drive as fallen branches and debris littered the route. By the time I turned onto Grandpa Harold's tree-lined street, twilight had faded to full darkness, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the grand homes like a Gothic tableau. Power outages had already affected parts of the neighborhood, and several houses stood dark and empty-looking. Grandpa's house, a 3-story colonial with white columns and black shutters, loomed at the end of a circular driveway. I'd expected it to be dark like the others, but a soft glow emanated from one of the first-floor windows. The security lights that usually illuminated the exterior were off, either from the power outage or because someone had deliberately disabled them. I parked in my usual spot and sat for a moment, gathering courage. The rain drummed on the roof of my car, providing an ominous soundtrack to my racing thoughts. I had my own key. Grandpa had given it to me years ago for emergencies and weekly visits. But something told me I should proceed with caution. Pulling my raincoat hood up, I dashed to the covered porch and inserted my key into the lock. The door swung open with surprising ease. Too much ease. Examining the frame more closely in the beam of my phone's flashlight, I could see splintered wood. Near the lock, someone had forced entry. Despite having access to keys, the hair on the back of my neck stood up as I stepped into the darkened foyer. The house felt different. The familiar scent of old books and Grandpa's pipe tobacco now mingled with something else, the chemical smell of cleaning products, as if someone had been attempting to erase evidence. I called out hesitantly, "Hello, is anyone here?" Only silence answered, broken by the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway, one of the few sounds that had remained constant throughout my life. The power was indeed out, but emergency lights cast a dim glow in the main hallway, part of the security system Grandpa had installed after a break-in attempt last year. Moving cautiously through the house, I noted immediate signs that something was wrong. The antique secretary desk in the hallway stood open, its contents disarrayed. In the living room, empty spaces on the walls, marked where valuable paintings had hung just days earlier. The glass display case housing Grandpa's collection of rare watches now contained only half its usual treasures. But it was the state of his office that confirmed my worst fears. The heavy oak door stood ajar, and inside, chaos reigned. Filing cabinets had been ransacked, their contents strewn across the Persian rug. The wall safe behind Grandpa's portrait hung open and empty. His computer showed signs of recent use, the screensaver disabled. Kneeling amid the scattered papers, I began gathering and organizing documents, looking for anything related to power of attorney or his will. After 30 minutes of searching, I found a leather portfolio labeled Essential Documents, tucked inside a hidden compartment in his desk. A secret drawer he'd shown me years ago, just in case. Inside were the answers I sought. Grandpa's actual will, updated just 6 months ago, naming me as the primary beneficiary and executor of his estate, with provisions for my parents that were generous but not excessive. Most importantly, a sticky, noting Grandpa's distinctive handwriting, was affixed to the medical power of attorney document. Amended March 15th. Removed Warren and Stephanie, designated Amber and Kimberly as co-agents. There was no financial power of attorney granting my parents any authority whatsoever. My hands shook as I took photos of each document, ensuring I had digital backups. As I carefully returned the portfolio to its hiding place, my phone rang, startling me in the quiet house. "Amber, it's Aunt Kim. I've been trying to reach you." Her voice sounded tense. "I'm at Grandpa's house. You won't believe what I found." "Listen to me carefully," she interrupted. "Your parents aren't just taking advantage of Dad's condition. They're desperate. Tyler Jameson at the bank called me. Your father's business investments have been failing for years. They're underwater on a second mortgage. And there are gambling debts, significant ones." "Gambling, Dad?" "Online day trading, sports betting, casino trips disguised as business conferences. Classic addiction patterns, all hidden from everyone. Tyler thinks they're facing potential bankruptcy if they don't come up with cash quickly." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. That explains why they couldn't wait for Grandpa to potentially recover. They need the money now. Exactly. Tyler's been monitoring the accounts since the suspicious transfers began. He's managed to freeze some of the larger ones, but a lot has already moved offshore. I found the real power of attorney documents. They have no legal right to any of this. That doesn't surprise me, but it makes what they're doing even worse. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, drowning out Aunt Kim's voice momentarily. When I could hear again, she was mid-sentence. "Stay there. Tyler and I are trying to get through the storm. Document everything, but be careful. If they realize, you know." A loud crash from downstairs cut through our conversation. I froze, listening intently. "Someone's here," I whispered into the phone. "I need to go." "Amber, wait." I ended the call and dimmed my phone screen, pressing myself against the wall beside the office door. Heavy footsteps moved through the first floor, accompanied by the unmistakable voices of my parents. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder shook the old house to its foundations. And then came the sound that would change everything. The front door blowing open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall, setting off a chain of events that would expose decades of family secrets and lies. The violent opening of the front door was followed by my father's curse, echoing through the hallway. "Damn it, Stephanie. I told you to latch it properly." "It's not my fault," my mother snapped back. "The storm is getting worse. We need to hurry." I remained frozen in the darkened office, mind racing. They clearly hadn't expected anyone to be here. I could try to slip out unnoticed, but the creaking floors of the old house would betray me instantly. Besides, I had evidence to protect now. Their voices grew closer as they moved through the house with the confidence of people who believed themselves alone and entitled to whatever they could carry away. "We need to get into the safe in his office," my father said, his voice just outside the door now. "There should be bearer bonds and the documents for the Lake Winnipesaukee property." "What about the Picasso sketch?" "It's small enough to transport, already in the car with the silver." "Focus, Stephanie." The beam of a flashlight preceded them into the office. I pressed myself further into the shadows behind the door, holding my breath as they entered. My father went directly to the safe, cursing again when he found it already open and empty. "Someone's been here." The flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing the disorder of papers I'd been sorting through. My mother gasped. "Warren, look at this. The drawers are open. Do you think it was broken into?" My father was silent for a moment, inspecting the room more carefully. "No, the alarm would have triggered." His voice hardened. "Amber has a key." The flashlight beam stopped moving, and I knew I'd been discovered, half hidden behind the door. "What are you doing here?" My father's voice was dangerously quiet. I stepped forward, refusing to cower. "I could ask you the same thing. Stealing from your own father while he's fighting for his life." My mother switched on a battery-powered lantern she'd brought, casting the room in harsh light that emphasized the evidence of their ransacking. "You don't understand what you're talking about," she said, but her usual confidence had faltered. "I understand perfectly. I saw the transfers, Mom. Almost $1 million in 3 days. And now you're here, taking anything that isn't bolted down." My father stepped toward me, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and fear. "This is none of your business, Amber. Your grandfather would want us to secure his valuables during his illness. By secure, you mean sell them to cover your gambling debts." The shock on his face confirmed Aunt Kim's information. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're stealing from him. And you lied about having power of attorney." My mother's composure cracked. "We deserve this money. Do you have any idea what it's been like living in Harold's shadow all these years? The constant reminders of our financial failures, while he sits in this mansion, doling out just enough to keep us dependent, but never enough to give us security. So that justifies theft, elder abuse. We're taking what should have been ours decades ago," my father shouted, all pretense abandoned. "Your grandfather built his fortune using ideas he stole from my research. Did he ever tell you that? His first patent was based on my college thesis work that he improved upon while I was still too young to protect my intellectual property." This was a narrative I'd never heard before. A desperate justification that seemed to have festered in my father's mind for years. Even if that were true, which I doubt, it doesn't give you the right to do this. "We had no choice," my mother interjected. "The bank is foreclosing on our house next month. Your father's investment firm is under investigation. We needed this to happen now while Harold is incapacitated." "You're talking about him like he's already dead." The realization hit me suddenly. "You don't want him to recover, do you?" The silence that followed was answer enough. My father moved toward Grandpa's desk, where I'd left the portfolio of documents. "Where is it? Where's the will?" "Safe," I replied, backing toward the door. "Along with evidence of everything you've done." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm with painful force. "Give me those documents." I twisted away, but my mother had circled behind me, blocking the exit. "Be reasonable, Amber. We can make this work. For all of us. There's enough money for everyone if we don't involve lawyers and courts." "I've already involved them," I lied, hoping to create doubt. "Everything I found has been sent to Grandpa's attorney." My father's face darkened. "You always were a problem. Too much like him. Sanctimonious. and judgmental. And you're nothing like him, I shot back. He built something. All you know how to do is take. The verbal blow landed with precision. My father's control snapped, and he rushed toward me just as a tremendous crash of thunder shook the house. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic or more fortunate for me. The sudden noise startled him, giving me the second I needed to dodge past and race toward the hallway. I sprinted up the curved staircase to the second floor, my parents in pursuit. The storm had intensified to near hurricane levels. Wind howling through broken windows somewhere in the house. Rain pouring in. The emergency lights flickered ominously. "Amber, stop this nonsense right now." My mother's voice carried. Up the stairs. I dashed into Grandpa's library, a room with a solid door and a working lock. I barely managed to secure it before my father slammed against the other side. "Open this door immediately." He pounded the wood. "You're making a terrible mistake." I backed away, mind racing. The library had no other exit, except a dumbwaiter that hadn't worked in decades, and windows that overlooked a 3-story, dropped to stone pavers below. "I've called the police," I shouted through the door, pulling out my phone to make the lie truth. "They're on their way now." "Police can't get here in this storm," my father replied, his voice frighteningly calm now. "Roads are flooded all over Cambridge. We have plenty of time to resolve this as a family." The doorknob rattled violently as they tried to force entry. I dialed 911, but as my father predicted, emergency services were overwhelmed by storm-related incidents. The dispatcher promised to send officers when possible, but couldn't estimate an arrival time. Next, I tried Aunt Kim again, but the call went straight to voicemail. The storm must have affected cell service. With trembling fingers, I texted Tyler Jameson, Grandpa's financial advisor and attorney, sending him photos of the documents I'd found, along with a brief explanation of the situation. Through the door, I could hear my parents' urgent whispers. As they discussed how to handle me, their voices grew more distinct, as my mother apparently convinced my father to try a different approach. "Amber, honey," she called, her voice artificially sweet. "Let's be reasonable. We can work this out together by dividing up Grandpa's money while he's still alive." "No thanks," I replied. "He would want us to be provided for," she continued. "You know how generous he always was. Generous on his terms, not yours, and certainly not through theft." My father lost patience again. "Enough games. The combination to the cabinet. Now." Cabinet? What cabinet was he talking about? Then it hit me. Grandpa's gun cabinet in his bedroom. My blood ran cold at the implication. "Warren, no." My mother's voice was sharp with alarm. "We're not going there. We've gone too far to back out now." He growled. "She knows everything." The argument that followed revealed the depth of their desperation and the extent of their planning. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. They had been setting this up for months, waiting for Grandpa Harold to show signs of vulnerability. "We've been planning this for years," my father admitted, perhaps hoping honesty would convince me to cooperate. Every investment failure, every debt, with the knowledge that Dad's fortune would eventually solve everything. "But he kept holding on," my mother added bitterly, "getting older but never quite sick enough. When the stroke happened, it felt like providence." Their words sickened me, but I kept them talking, recording their confession on my phone while searching the library for anything I could use to defend myself if they breached the door. The heavy paperweight on Grandpa's desk would have to do. The pounding on the door resumed, more forceful now. The antique lock wouldn't hold much longer against such assault. Just as the wood began to splinter around the hinges, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening and voices calling out from below cut through the chaos. Amber, are you here? Cambridge Police Department. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it made my knees weak. But how had they gotten through the storm so quickly? Then I heard another voice, Tyler Jameson's distinctive baritone. Upstairs! I heard voices upstairs. My parents' footsteps retreated hastily down the hallway. I flung open the library door and rushed to the landing, in time to see two police officers confronting my parents at the bottom of the stairs, while Tyler Jameson and Aunt Kim stood in the foyer, drenched from the storm, but looking grimly determined. Officers, my father began, attempting to regain his composure. This is a family misunderstanding. Save it, Warren. Aunt Kim cut him off. Tyler has the bank records. We know exactly what you've done. The look of defeat that crossed my parents' faces confirmed what I already knew. Their carefully constructed plan was collapsing around them, exposed to the harsh light of truth, just as the storm outside had exposed the vulnerabilities in Grandpa Harold's home. The standoff in the foyer was tense, illuminated by the officers' flashlights and punctuated by thunder. My parents stood side by side at the bottom of the stairs, physically blocking the officers from ascending while maintaining a veneer of cooperation. Officers, I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding, my father said, summoning the authoritative tone he used with financial clients. My wife and I are simply securing my father's valuables during this dangerous storm. You can verify our identities. We're the property owner's next of kin. The older officer, whose nameplate read Sergeant Reyes, remained impassive. Sir, we received reports of breaking and entering at this address, followed by information about potential financial exploitation of an elderly person. We need everyone to remain calm while we sort this out. I descended the stairs slowly, keeping a careful distance from my parents. They've been transferring money from my grandfather's accounts while he's unconscious in the ICU, I explained. Nearly $1 million in the past 3 days. They falsely claim to have power of attorney. That's absurd, my mother interjected. We have every legal right. No, Stephanie, you don't. Tyler Jameson stepped forward, his tailored suit soaked, but his legal authority intact. As Harold Mitchell's attorney for the past 20 years, I can confirm that Warren and Stephanie Mitchell have no legal authority over his finances. Furthermore, as his financial advisor, I've documented unauthorized transfers totaling $987,500 from various accounts since Mr. Mitchell's hospitalization. The younger officer moved toward my parents. We're going to need statements from everyone. Suddenly, the situation escalated. My father, seeing the inevitable outcome, made a desperate move toward the front door. The officer blocked his path, and in the ensuing scuffle, my father shoved him with enough force to constitute assault on a police officer. Within seconds, both my parents were being restrained and read their rights, their protests echoing through the grand foyer where countless family gatherings had once taken place. As they were being escorted to the police cruiser, my father turned to face me, his expression a disturbing mixture of rage and desperation. This isn't over, Amber. You have no idea what you're doing. There are things about your grandfather you don't know. Things that would change how you see all of this. What things, Dad? More justifications for theft. Ask him about the Mitchell Technologies patent dispute of 1982. Ask him where he really got the seed money for his precious company. His voice rose as the officers guided him toward the door. Your saint of a grandfather built his fortune on stolen ideas and family betrayal long before we ever touched a penny. The door closed behind them. Muffling his final accusations, stood frozen, wondering how much was desperate fabrication and how much might contain kernels of uncomfortable truth. Aunt Kim approached, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. Don't let him get to you. Warren has been rewriting history for decades to justify his resentment. Is there any truth to what he's saying? I asked. She sighed heavily. Family history is rarely black and white, Amber. Your grandfather and your father had a business disagreement early on, a legitimate intellectual property dispute that was resolved legally. Warren never accepted the court's decision and has been nursing that grievance ever since. Tyler Jameson joined us, already on his phone, coordinating with bank officials. I've initiated emergency freeze orders on all remaining accounts, he reported. The offshore transfers are more complicated, but we have contacts at the Treasury Department who can help. This is exactly the kind of elder financial abuse case that gets priority attention. The logistics of the next few hours passed in a blur. Police officers documented the scene, photographing empty spaces where artwork had hung and inventorying missing items. Tyler coordinated with financial institutions, while Aunt Kim made arrangements for security contractors to repair the damaged doors and windows. Once the storm subsided, I provided my statement, handing over recordings and photographs of the evidence I'd gathered. The process was exhausting, but necessary, each step cementing the reality of my parents' betrayal and the legal consequences they would face. As the initial chaos settled, Sergeant Reyes approached me with an update. Miss Mitchell, we've secured the premises as best we can, given the weather conditions. Your parents are being processed downtown, but given the severity of the storm, arraignment won't happen until roads clear. What charges are they facing? I asked, the weight of the question nearly choking me. Preliminary charges include burglary, grand larceny, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and assault on a police officer. The district attorney will make final determinations once all evidence is reviewed. The reality of my parents potentially serving prison time should have felt vindicating, but instead left me hollow. Regardless of their actions, they were still my parents. The family I'd known my entire life had been irreparably fractured in the span of a few days. As if sensing my turmoil, Aunt Kim guided me to the kitchen, the one room that still felt somewhat normal despite the evening's chaos. She put on a kettle using the gas stove that still worked despite the power outage. The simple act of making tea, providing a moment of mundane comfort. Your grandfather always said you were the strongest of us all, she said quietly. Tonight proved him right. I don't feel strong, I admitted. I feel like our entire family history just imploded. Not imploded, she corrected gently. Clarified. What happened tonight wasn't the destruction of our family. It was the lancing of a wound that's been festering for decades. As we sat in the flickering candlelight, my phone rang unexpectedly. The hospital number displayed on the screen sent a shock of fear through me. Hello, this is Amber, Mitchell. Dr. Patel's voice came through clearly, despite the storm interference. Ms. Mitchell, I'm calling with news about your grandfather. We've been gradually reducing his sedation as the swelling subsided, and he's showing strong signs of neurological response. He's beginning to wake up. The teacup slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor as relief washed over me. He's waking up? Will he be okay? It's too early for guarantees, but his responses are extremely encouraging. His Glasgow Coma Scale score has improved significantly. If you can safely make it to the hospital, I'd recommend it. Familiar voices often help during emergence from sedation. I looked out at the storm, still raging beyond the windows, then at Aunt Kim and Tyler, who had both recognized from my expression that something significant had happened. Grandpa's waking up, I told them. Fresh tears, these of hope rather than despair, filling my eyes. Tyler immediately stood. My SUV has four-wheel drive. If the main roads are passable, we can get there. The journey to Massachusetts, general through the storm, became a metaphor for the past few days. Treacherous, uncertain, but driven by unwavering purpose. Fallen trees and flooded sections, forced detours. But Tyler navigated with determination, his headlights cutting through sheets of rain as Aunt Kim made calls, updating the hospital of our progress. By the time we arrived, the worst of the storm had begun to subside, as if nature itself had exhausted its fury. Alongside our family drama, the hospital's emergency generators hummed efficiently, islands of light and warmth in a city largely gone dark. Dr. Patel met us outside the ICU, his expression cautiously optimistic. He's been responding to verbal stimuli and showed eye movement consistent with tracking. These are very good signs. Don't expect full consciousness yet, but he's definitely emerging. Grandpa Harold still looked frail against the white hospital sheets, but subtle differences were immediately apparent. The ventilator had been replaced with a less invasive oxygen cannula. His color seemed better, and as I approached, his eyelids fluttered. "Grandpa," I said softly, taking his hand. "It's Amber. I'm here." His fingers twitched against mine, a small movement that represented an enormous victory. "Harold, you gave us quite a scare," Aunt Kim said, her voice breaking slightly as she joined me at his bedside. A nurse entered to check his vitals, smiling at the readings. "His numbers are improving by the hour. Your grandfather is quite the fighter." "You have no idea," I replied, thinking of the battle that had been fought in his name while he lay unconscious, a battle he was now rejoining, bringing with him the strength and clarity that had always defined him. As the nurse left, Grandpa's eyes opened again, staying open longer this time. His gaze slowly focused on my face, recognition dawning gradually but unmistakably. His lips moved, attempting to form words around the oxygen apparatus. I leaned closer. "Don't try to talk yet, Grandpa. Just rest. Everything's going to be okay." His hand tightened around mine with surprising strength, his eyes communicating what his voice could not yet express. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that, regardless of what challenges lay ahead, his recovery, my parents' legal proceedings, unraveling the financial damage, we would face them together, with truth finally prevailing over decades of resentment and deception. The front door blowing open during the storm had done more than expose my parents' scheme. It had blown open the doors to long-buried family secrets, allowing light and truth to enter at last. 1 month later, autumn had transformed Cambridge. The storm damage had been repaired. Leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and Grandpa Harold was home, seated in his favorite leather chair by the library fireplace. His recovery had defied even the most optimistic medical projections. Not a full return to his pre-stroke capabilities, but remarkable nonetheless. "The therapist says your progress is exceptional," I told him, adjusting the blanket over his legs. "She's particularly impressed with your speech improvements." Grandpa smiled, the right side of his face still showing subtle signs of the stroke. "Mitchell's are stubborn," he replied, his words clear but delivered more slowly than his pre-stroke rapid-fire speech. "Too stubborn to let a little brain blip keep us down." His characteristic understatement made me laugh. A little brain blip that had nearly taken his life, followed by complications that had extended his hospital stay for 3 weeks. Yet, here he was, back in his home with in-home nursing care and a determination that impressed everyone from his doctors to his physical therapists. The house had changed subtly to accommodate his new needs. A stairlift installed, bathrooms modified, doorways widened for potential wheelchair access, but the essence of the place remained unchanged, still filled with the books, art, and memories that defined Grandpa Harold's remarkable life. What had changed irrevocably was our family structure. My parents remained under house arrest while awaiting trial, having posted bail with funds from selling their home. The legal proceedings moved forward methodically, with Tyler Jameson coordinating a team of financial forensics experts who had managed to recover nearly 70% of the stolen funds. "Any word on the Picasso sketch?" Grandpa asked, referring to one of the still missing items. "Not yet. The detective thinks they might have already sold it through a private dealer." He waved his hand dismissively. "Just paper and pencil. The important things are back, where they belong." His perspective continually humbled me. Despite everything my parents had done, he refused to dwell on the material losses. What pained him more deeply was the family fracture, though he never explicitly said so. Aunt Kim entered with a tray of tea, having temporarily relocated from Chicago to help with Grandpa's care. "Mail arrived," she announced, including a letter from Warren's attorney. Grandpa nodded. "Read it to me later." The legal communications had become routine. Motions filed, plea negotiations, restitution proposals. My father's desperate courthouse steps accusation about pardon theft had proven largely baseless, though Tyler had discovered court records from the early 1980s documenting a legitimate intellectual property dispute that had been resolved in Grandpa's favor by a federal judge. He truly believed I stole his ideas, Grandpa had explained when I finally asked him about it. The truth was more complicated. Warren contributed to early research, but the breakthrough concepts and practical applications were mine. And courts agreed, but your father never accepted that reality. Understanding the origins of my father's resentment didn't excuse his actions, but helped explain the decades-long buildup of bitterness that had ultimately corrupted both my parents. Still struggled with guilt about not noticing earlier signs of their scheme. I should have recognized what was happening when things started disappearing from the house. I confessed to Grandpa one evening. "Amber," he replied gently, "you saw exactly what a loving granddaughter would see. Parents finally showing interest in their aging father. You chose to believe the best about them. That's not a character flaw. It's a strength." His forgiveness came more easily than my own. The betrayal had forced me to re-examine every family interaction through a new lens, questioning how much had been genuine and how much calculation. Therapy had become part of my weekly routine, a court-mandated requirement for all family members affected by the case. Initially resistant, I'd come to value the objective perspective as I navigated the complex emotions of having parents facing criminal charges. The legal consequences had proven substantial. My parents had ultimately accepted a plea agreement to avoid trial, with my father receiving a 5-year sentence for the more serious charges, and my mother 18 months, with probation to follow. The court had also ordered restitution payments and mandatory financial counseling upon release. The family therapy sessions mandated by the court were perhaps the most challenging aspect of the aftermath. Sitting across from my parents, acknowledging the damage while attempting to understand the underlying causes required emotional reserves I sometimes feared I didn't possess. "I don't know if I can ever trust them again," I admitted to Grandpa. "Is that terrible?" "Trust isn't a right, it's earned," he replied, "and when broken so thoroughly, it may never fully recover. But understanding doesn't require trust, and forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. His wisdom guided me through the darkest moments, as did the unexpected support that emerged from the community. Neighbors brought meals during Grandpa's first week home. His former colleagues visited regularly, bringing updates from the business world that kept his mind engaged. Even the hospital staff had formed connections, with his favorite nurse, Jasmine, stopping by on her day off to check on his progress. The house itself had been made secure again, with a state-of-the-art security system installed after the break-in. Cameras monitored the perimeter, and a direct line to the police station provided peace of mind during Grandpa's recovery. "It feels like Fort Knox sometimes," he complained good-naturedly. "Can't even sneak a cigar on the porch without setting off some alarm." "That's the idea," I teased, grateful for his humor. Returning alongside his health, on this particular Sunday, we'd resumed our tradition of family dinner, though with a smaller group than before. Aunt Kim had prepared Grandpa's favorite pot roast, and Tyler Jameson had joined us, his role having evolved from family attorney to trusted friend throughout the ordeal. As we gathered around the dining table, Grandpa insisted on standing to carve the roast himself, wavering slightly but determined. We watched anxiously until he successfully served each plate with a triumphant smile. "A toast," he proposed, raising his water glass, alcohol still prohibited with his medications, "to family, not as we wish it to be, but as it truly is, to truth that, however painful, allows us to build something authentic." The simplicity of his toast belied its profound impact. Each of us had been forever changed by the events of the past month, forced to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics that had festered beneath polite Sunday dinners for decades. "I've been thinking," Grandpa continued after we'd begun eating, "about restructuring some of my charitable foundation work. Amber, I'd like you to consider taking a more active role." The suggestion caught me by surprise. "In what way?" "Specifically, developing programs, addressing elder financial abuse awareness and prevention. Your experience gives you unique insight." The proposal resonated immediately. Throughout the legal proceedings, I'd been shocked to learn how common such exploitation was, and how few resources existed for prevention and recovery. "I'd be honored," I replied, already envisioning educational outreach and support networks. As dinner concluded and Tyler helped clear dishes despite our protests, Grandpa motioned me to join him by the fireplace, where family photos chronicled happier times. "The hardest lesson I've learned," he said quietly, "is that wealth, while providing comfort and opportunity, can also destroy what matters most if it becomes the measure of love and worth." He picked up a photo of my father as a young man, standing proudly beside his first car, a gift from Grandpa. I wonder sometimes if I contributed to Warren's problems by trying to solve too many with money, rather than time and understanding. The vulnerability in his reflection brought tears to my eyes. "You can't take responsibility for their choices, Grandpa." "No, but I can acknowledge that family legacies are complex. Financial and emotional inheritances intertwined." He took my hand. "Promise me something, Amber. Whatever material wealth eventually comes to you, remember that the true inheritance is this: the ability to learn from mistakes, to rebuild after betrayal, to value people over possessions." "I promise," I whispered. Later that evening, as Aunt Kim and Tyler engaged Grandpa in a spirited discussion about baseball statistics, I stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The neighborhood had settled into evening quietude, lights glowing warmly from surrounding homes where other families lived out their own complicated stories. The past month had stripped away illusions about perfect families and happy endings. The path forward would include supervised prison visits, ongoing legal proceedings, and the slow, uncertain work of determining what family relationships might be salvageable. Yet, watching through the window as Grandpa laughed at something Tyler said, his face animated with the intellectual engagement he treasured, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had weathered the storm, literally and figuratively, and emerged with painful clarity, but also possibility. The front door that had blown open during that fateful night had let in destruction, but also truth. The exposure had been brutal, but necessary, revealing not just my parents' deception, but also the strength of connections that remained when false pretenses were stripped away. As I returned inside to the warmth of the library, Grandpa looked up with a smile that acknowledged our shared journey through darkness towards something authentic and enduring, a legacy worth preserving long after material wealth had ceased to matter. Have you ever discovered a betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you rebuild your life afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest family betrayals. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the strongest families are the ones rebuilt after being broken. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next story.